It's my pleasure to be here presenting my research on the history of hot springs and tourism in British Columbia, entitled Nature's Health-Giving Waters, Promoting Health and Pleasure Tourism at Harrison Hot Springs, 1920 to 1930. All right, so in the summer of 1920, a fire erupted on the roof of the St. Alice Hotel, which was situated along the southern shores of Harrison Lake in British Columbia. This fire destroyed key tourism accommodation and diminished access for health seekers and tourists to the healing properties of the nearby hot springs. News of this fire was reported throughout the province, noting the loss of a well-known British Columbian hotel. However, the loss of this tourist destination invited possibility. This was an opportunity to recast Harrison and its environmental features into a resort that could provide not only healing, but also leisure and recreation. Remaking Harrison Hot Springs into a pleasure resort was accomplished by building a new hotel that strove to place recreational pleasure in the minds of tourists, alongside the health benefits of the springs. The new Harrison Hot Springs Hotel drew on both the therapeutic reputation of mineral springs and the local history to construct a popular destination catering to a new age of interwar tourism in British Columbia. This talk demonstrates that after land developers constructed a new hotel along the shores of Harrison Lake in 1926, promotion for the hotel and mineral springs shifted focus from a destination centered on wellness to one centered more around tourist pleasure and recreational activities. The history of Harrison Hot Springs as a tourist destination offers insight into the philosophy of therapeutic landscapes around the turn of the 20th century, and the way environmental features such as mineral springs were promoted and sold as experiences to promote health and allow tourists to engage in leisure. This paper acts as a case study for the history of hot spring tourism in Western Canada during the early 20th century. In this presentation, I'm going to examine a bit of the historiography on therapeutic landscapes and the promotion of environmental landscapes for tourism, discuss the history of mineral spring tourism and the wellness beliefs that surrounded them, and then focus in more specifically on Harrison Hot Springs as a mean to examine all these themes about the therapeutic landscapes, the tourism, and overall trends in tourism in British Columbia, along with the shifting notions of health, pleasure, and leisure for tourists in this interwar period. So from the 1890s into the 1920s, hot springs were usually made accessible to tourists with the construction of elaborate health spas, which contributed to the vision that led to the establishment of Harrison Hot Springs as a resort for elite health-seeking tourists around this period. So the location of Harrison Hot Springs played a significant role in how the resort was built and how the owners marketed it to tourists. Harrison Hot Springs is located just off the shores of Harrison Lake, north of Harrison Mills and near Agassiz in the Harrison River Valley region. The area is the traditional territory of the Stahelis people, and near the Harrison Hot Springs area was the location of a traditional pit house and plank house village. The location of Harrison Hot Springs is very significant because initially for the development, they faced huge challenges to access for both tourists and to just build the hotel. Many of the initial transport routes that had come to the lake had been redirected with the Caribou Wagon Road after the 1860s. But once the Canadian Pacific Railway was running along the north bank of the Fraser Valley, the hot springs became a lot more accessible for tourists, and then eventually were able to benefit from the proximity of Vancouver and the growing number of residents in the area, both with the railroad and eventually with the construction of roads to the area. So this research examines Harrison Hot Springs as an example of mineral spring tourism in Western Canada. And I realized through my research experience that the development of tourist accommodation at Harrison Hot Springs provided an opportunity to really examine how the tourist industry in British Columbia shifted from the early 20th century into the 1920s with a focus on civic boosterism and the evolving tourist expectations of what their experience would be when they went on vacation, shifting a lot more to focus on many of the recreational activities and much more adventurous tourism they would experience with their vacation time. So during the early 20th century in British Columbia, and particularly on Vancouver Island, these areas were touted as vacation destinations that would allow travelers from North America to maintain connections with commerce and some of the expectations of modern-day life, but also take advantage of the restorative powers of British Columbia's landscape. Vacations were seen as providing the health-giving properties of rest and leisure, which some British Columbians noted in magazines like Sunset and Saturday Night as vital for sustaining an efficient and productive society. Historian Michael Dawson has examined these concepts and identified that between 1890 to 1930, one of the main motivators for tourists was the desire to escape the fast-paced life of the modern world and return to nature as both a means of healing, but also to somewhat conquer the landscapes of British Columbia with their adventures and their recreational activities. So during this period, civic boosterism was characterized by the desire to bring industrial development and settlers to cities in North America, with publicity campaigns for local amenities and the promise of tax concessions and grants to build there. In Western Canada specifically, many of these campaigns were driven by beautification initiatives, highlighting things like the scenic landscape, the climate, and land-based opportunities for agriculture or fishing, so lots of the different recreational activities that you could do there. Within my research, I also found that Harrison was distinct in how the resort developed compared to some of the other hot springs I looked at. It was a very early development of a resort. The resort was built in 1886, and it quickly developed a reputation in BC for luxury and healing. So when the St. Alice did burn down, it somewhat transitioned its reputation and was able to focus on other aspects of a pleasure resort. And providing more luxury amenities, but also still able to capitalize on the healing powers of the waters. Also, the proximity to Vancouver and the CPR lines and eventual roads to the area allowed Harrison to market itself as a vacation for Vancouverites who are seeking to escape the city, but also for other travelers who may be coming up from America. Bellingham was flagged as a particularly important place to market to, especially with automobile travel. Okay, so I have a video that I can show that kind of demonstrates a little bit of these trends in civic boosterism. It's going to start playing. Here we go.
Big city. City.
Can you move the mouse? It's some mouse.
Progressive means in this country. Lots of wood on.
Yeah, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Progressive.
That is Hastings Street. It was progressive because they did things like streetcars.
Yeah.
Just think they pulled all those tracks.
Open air.
Wow. See the
Carnegie Center in Hastings.
Is that the Carnegie?
Observation cars. Teddy Lyons or something. Victory Square.
This is where the unemployed are going to meet. Actually, same time, 34. Yeah.
It's after 90.
What, it's this big station?
Lands involved in harbour, I suppose they never had a harbour.
Yeah.
You know, if you want.
Yeah.
Sinclair Center.
The redundancy department.
Unnecessary redundancy.
Yeah, unnecessary redundancy. Oh,
That's right.
Is that a Union steamship? Certainly are,
Yeah.
absolutely, yes. Kingsbridge, South Oh, yes, houses.
Cabriolet house, no?
Yes.
It's a modest little cottage.
That's where my gardener lives. This is
Middle class.
no, this is the Shaughnessy headquarters of the KKK. I see a black and white film of flowers is a bit of a brown.
Imagine what color it might be.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Sepia colored
World
flowers
famous.
are hard to grow.
I think it's quite surrounded, yeah.
Tea house.
Yes.
That's in the park.
Coffee house is next.
Right, right. I'm gonna get the car in the tree, probably.
You wonder how long it's
Ah, yes, she does. She broods, yes. She's
I can
well
hear
known
her
for
brooding.
brooding.
It's supposed to be silent though.
It's remarkable.
You're gonna have
Chickens.
Brooding chickens.
Brooding chickens, yeah.
no coyotes.
Why are we so cynical, really?
All right, so it's 10 minutes long, so I won't play the whole thing, but.
So where's Harrison?
So Harrison is about 130 kilometers north.
I mean,
In the film, it's not in the film, but I couldn't find any footage of Harrison, but I think this captures kind of the idea of this civic boosterism, where they're trying to attach the beauty of nature with the modern life. Harrison very much built into this, where it was an escape from the city nearby. Once you started getting access there, you could equally escape there like you could to Stanley Park.
Who paid for the film?
That's it's a government film.
Canadian government?
They contracted with
Yeah.
California to do the film.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Film capital of the world.
So it definitely demonstrates a few of the trends in the civic boosterism campaigns. The promotion of Stanley Park, as I said, speaks to the impulse of many of the urban reformers to beautify the city of urban centers and parks as a way to create kind of order despite the supposed chaos of a city life. And so the desire mirrors the idea that travel to a natural environment is an escape and a key element of creating an orderly society. So there's little historiographic work that's really been done on the Harrison region, let alone how the area was developed around the hot springs and the building of the tourist resorts. For my research, I drew on two local histories about Harrison Hot Springs, one by Daphne Slay and one by Belle Randall, and that shaped my understanding of the settler development in the district. I was also influenced by historical research by Carolyn Leifers, Martha Jories, and Peter Griggs, who highlighted how a belief in the healing powers of the hot springs was capitalized on to entice tourists in other areas like Banff, South Dakota in America, and Australia, respectively. This research also contributes somewhat to the history of just overall tourism in British Columbia during the interwar years. Michael Dawson's research on this period greatly informed my understanding. The research also emphasizes the role of health in environmental history. Environmental historian Greg Mittman has noted the significance of this research, stating that using place-based approaches to environmental health history gives attention to the embodied local geographies of health and disease and offers an important convergence between medical history and how it relates to cultural and social histories of medicine. Then the primary sources that support this research are largely newspaper articles detailing the developments and the various promotions of Harrison HotSprings and its hotels. The articles largely come from the province, the Vancouver Sun, and the Victoria Daily Times. Promotional materials also from the Canadian Pacific Railway were employed, and I examined pamphlets on scientific research into Canadian mineral springs, which demonstrate some of the scientific understanding that shaped the promotion of this area. So during the 19th century, many wealthy Britons frequented mineral springs as a type of quote-unquote wilderness cure. And by the 1870s, many luxury accommodations were constructed in England and the eastern United States to cater to this trend of elite health seekers. Wilderness treatments, according to geographer Kenneth Thompson, were centered around the belief that climate, vegetation, nutrition, and exercise opportunities found in the natural environments could alleviate physical and mental discomforts and cure illness. This belief in the healing powers of these natural environments was paired with the 1840s water cure movement called hydropathy or hydrotherapy that advised the drinking, bathing, and applying of pure, cold water to the body. These medical theories were employed at luxury resorts and spas to attract elite health seekers from Western Europe and the Americas, as spaces for healing and respite developed based around these theories of health are defined in this presentation as therapeutic landscapes. This is a term coined by geographers Robin Kearns and Wilbert Gessler as places that have achieved lasting reputations for providing physical, mental, and spiritual healing. Growing scientific research into disease and belief in the natural environment as a cure contributed to a rise in promoting hot springs as therapeutic environments that could cure disease. And the development of hot springs as tourist destinations in North America is connected to this broader pattern of promoting geographical features for their physical, psychological, and moral benefits. And often the aesthetics of the environment contributed not only to the promotion of tourism, but also the healing benefits of the environment. So in Canada, the hot springs at Banff, as seen here, have generally received particular attention as a famous center for healing and tourism starting in the 1880s. Carolyn Liefers has shown that 19th century health theories drove Banff's early development as a health and pleasure resort. The curative potential of a picturesque natural landscape and the mineral springs appealed to a financially struggling government, powerful railway companies, and work-weary urbanites, which provided funding, building opportunities for companies, and a defined class of consumers to promote to. Lesser-known hot springs in Canada were also of growing interest by the turn of the 20th century, and promoters of British Columbia's nascent tourism industry used this rhetoric of health and wellness to shape the hot springs into a profitable business venture. For example, you can see this at Ainsworth. The resort opened in 1930. However, there had been attempts to commercialize the springs all the way back in 1911 with a swimming pool and plans to expand the caves for swimming by three men, Thomas Proctor, W.J. Wilson, and J.W. Smith. Halcyon Hot Springs near Nakusp opened in 1894, operating as a sanitarium that promoted health with the construction of plunge baths and promoting the lithium in the water as able to purify the blood. By 1924, similar to Harrison Hot Springs, the Halcyon Hotel had begun to cater to a wide variety of guests with a range of recreational activities and rooms for dances and parties. Additionally, the bathing pools at Radium Hot Springs were first constructed in 1914 by Roland Stewart, an Englishman who had purchased the land back in 1890. And so I do have a clip from a Canadian Government Motion Picture Bureau film. It's a travelogue called Motoring in Cloudlands from 1825. Unfortunately, I don't have any footage of Harrison, but this is Radium Hot Springs.
on the road. No, not dangerous, right?
That's what you call a rustic.
So it's always wet. Especially brains.
Your brains is great.
Yeah. I just got a clip from The Shining. I'm working that plane makes jacket on the water. She's smoking a pipe.
Take your pipe to the beach.
Takes the creek out of his pipe.
Right. So there are numerous stories that exist about the way that European settlers found the Harrison Hot Springs. One of the most popular stories is about a group of gold miners who capsized on Harrison Lake, thinking they were going to plunge to their deaths, but surprised to find the water upon landing was pleasantly warm. So according to historian Daphne Slay, the first written reference to the mineral springs at Harrison was by Matthew Begbie in 1859, who at the time was Chief Justice for the Crown Colony of British Columbia. It's understood that the springs were well known to the miners who were frequenting the area before this. However, Begbie's report resulted in increased attention to the potential health and tourism benefits of the area. After 1859, numerous claims to ownership were made over the springs, with many prospective buyers aiming to build some form of accommodation along with hot baths for health seekers. However, interest somewhat dwindled until a New Westminster land speculator, Joseph Armstrong, preempted the land in 1876. The development of tourism at Harrison Hot Springs was still quite slow. The location of hot springs, as I mentioned, was difficult for land developers to build, and so they required some transportation links that could allow access for tourists, but also to allow them to bring supplies up. So people coming in from the region were mainly at this point relying on boats coming upriver from Harrison Mills, which made it very difficult to bring in these supplies, let alone any tourists. So by 1880, Joseph Armstrong had officially received a Crown grant for the site of the hot springs, and he began to realize his vision of transforming the springs into a world-class spa. Yet it was not until 1886, when the construction of the St. Alice Hotel began, that any tourists were able to come there, with the hotel being completed in November of that year. Even with the CPR running near Harrison by 1886, there were still barriers for tourists to access the site, as the road from Agassiz to Harrison was still under construction, and that was the nearest railway stop. By 1887, the landowners were finally able to provide full tourist access, and the CPR was running automobiles from the Agassiz stop. And now the St. Alice Hotel was complete, to much excitement. It quickly became a really well-known and renowned luxury resort. The actual hot springs at the site were made accessible to guests in several ways. In an annex off of the St. Alice Hotel, there were 4 baths that were built with piping from the springs, in addition to the building of a bathhouse on the site of the springs themselves. The bathhouse at the springs consisted of both ordinary and vapor baths built around a central pool, with separate departments for women. However, maintaining the site proved difficult, and in 1905, the bathhouse at the hot springs was destroyed by a fire, and it was never rebuilt as all the energy was placed into maintaining the St. Alice Hotel itself. The hotel seemingly attracted elite and distinguished guests right from the start, receiving praise from the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. Although marketing the new health resort at turn-of-the-century British Columbia required crafting a particular image that would reach a desirable tourist clientele, and these were predominantly wealthy, health-seeking, educated, and of British background. The spa was advertised as providing cosmetic benefits for women, but it also claimed to treat dyspepsia, rheumatism, liver complaints, and paralysis. While the St. Alice Hotel was largely promoted for healing, great energy was also placed in ensuring that the hotel met the high standard of luxury that the desired guests would expect, with fine dining, elegant rooms, and activities like dancing and a billiards room. So the European discovery of hot springs near Harrison Lake on traditional Chehalis territory brought colonial views of land and science to the environment. The science of mineral springs found itself at the intersection between changing concepts of disease and medicine. Ailments believed to be stemming from miasmic conditions or bad air were often prescribed environmental cures that fed into the idea that certain geographic features could treat illness. By the 20th century, scientific research on hot springs was growing, with the Canadian Bureau of Mines conducting its own survey into the mineral compositions of hot springs and their potential benefits. Banff Hot Springs was the first to be tested in 1916, and the healing value that was attributed to them was generalized to other hot springs in the mountains of Western Canada, with Halcyon Hot Springs and Harrison Hot Springs being mentioned as famous mineral springs in British Columbia that deserved increased scientific research. So by 1920, Harrison Hot Springs was a prime example of tourism building on the promotion of medical geography to attract visitors. Since its completion in 1886, the St. Alice Hotel provided accommodation for up to 130 guests, aimed to create an image of a luxury establishment, and provided access to the healing powers of the natural environment and the mineral springs. This brings us back to July of 1920, when disaster struck the St. Alice Hotel with the roof catching fire. While there were no casualties, the hotel was lost, along with the ability to bring accommodation to tourists. It would take 5 years before concrete plans to rebuild a major hotel at Harrison began to materialize. The proposed rebuilding also argued for a revitalization of Harrison as a growing town site, with aims to create the public perception of a first-class tourist destination in British Columbia. The opportunity to rebuild a hotel at an already established destination gave property owners the ability to connect this traditional appeal of the hot springs with a tourist industry that increasingly was coming to focus on pleasure and recreation. Numerous proposals were floated after 1920 to build new accommodations and improve the tourist perception of Harrison Hot Springs. In 1921, the Maple Leaf Hotel opened under the ownership of Napoleon Pigeon, a French-Canadian entrepreneur. Local histories report that this hotel also burned down soon after its construction, although this loss was not as widely reported as it never attracted the same reputation or number of visitors as the St. Alice. Therefore, despite attempts to develop another major hotel, these plans never succeeded until the Harrison Hot Springs Hotel Company was incorporated by Vancouver investors in 1926. These investors took on the project of revitalizing the image and location of Harrison Hot Springs, along with building a hotel with modern technologies and improved amenities. The new owners of Harrison Hot Springs shifted the emphasis of the hotel from a health spa to a modern pleasure resort, seeking out a wider clientele of pleasure-seeking tourists and holidaymakers. Rebuilding Harrison Hot Springs as a tourist destination meant more than just the construction of a new hotel. It also meant adapting to tourist expectations and recasting the healing appeal of British Columbia's tourism economy during the 1920s tourist boom. Transportation to Harrison Hot Springs was fundamental to transforming the region into a center for healing and recreation. The newspaper promotion for Harrison had always noted the means of travel to get there, as access had long been a challenge, but emphasizing the scenic travel routes, transportation was then built into the promotion for the experience of visiting Harrison Hot Springs. The hotel was accessible via railway lines, automobile travel, or ferry, so that by 1926, tourists could reach the hot springs in a variety of ways. And this improved transportation demonstrates the pattern of wider accessibility and class diversity among travelers within British Columbia's interwar tourism industry, shifting away from this marketing that had favored a clientele of landed elites from Britain. So post-World I tourism in British Columbia saw a dramatic expansion, as seen with Michael Dawson's analysis of tourism culture in this period. Particularly important to this shift was the increasing accessibility for the middle-class tourist destinations with the automobile specifically. Similar to how the CPR had helped bring tourists to the St. Alice after it opened in 1886, the new Harrison HotSprings Hotel was able to attract a greater volume of middle-class tourists who could now afford auto travel. Automobility brought a wider accessibility to tourism, and the promoters of hotels, resorts, and all sorts of famous landmarks now needed to appeal to a much larger, more diverse class of consumers. So when the Harrison HotSprings Hotel was completed in 1926, it opened amidst a rapidly evolving tourism industry that was heavily influenced by these tourists' changing expectations and backgrounds. The hotel placed pressure to have the road from Lake Erie to Agassiz complete before the opening of the hotel in May so that lots of tourists could get there. This is some sections from an article from 1924 about one initial bid to rebuild Harrison HotSprings. This one didn't come through, but it gives you a sense of the new direction that people looking to invest in this new hotel were going in. So it says that Harrison HotSprings is a spot here, and there's an opportunity for the publicity committee working with tourist bureaus from the south of the line to route every automobile tourist through the hot springs on their way to Vancouver. It is also an opportunity for public-spirited British Columbians to get behind a project that will build up their city and their province and a profit to themselves. This article notes that Harrison HotSprings was the logical holiday resort for Bellingham, Vancouver, and every intermediate town and city, calling it the magnet which will draw tourists from every trail along the Pacific. Also note how it says that the new hotel will be fireproof. Yeah. And it was made of brick, so... So what did tourists expect from this new resort after it was completed? As the British Columbia tourism industry developed, these resorts were expected to offer experiences of pleasure and leisure along with new modern recreation. In an ambitious bid to rebuild the Harrison HotSprings Resort, which you saw the clips of there, two men from Vancouver laid plans to recreate the healing and pleasurable atmosphere of the St. Alice, while also proposing to add recreational activities like fishing, golfing, swimming, trap shooting, all sorts of things. The bidders, former Speaker in the BC Legislature, J.W. Wirt, and Vancouver City Auditor, John Kendall, were clearly aware of this shifting direction for the tourism industry, and they modeled their hotel proposal accordingly. Their development proposal attempted to appeal to investors by arguing that the hotel would connect the publicity committee with tourist bureaus to promote automobile travel to Harrison. Although this 1924 proposal for the hotel did not come to fruition, it laid the groundwork for the Harrison HotSprings Hotel to be built in 1926 by new owners. Additionally, at this time, you see some changing understandings of disease and the potential effectiveness of the wilderness therapy. You mostly see that the practice of wilderness therapy began to fall out of favor as a prescribed medical cure. New research on microbes and the germ theory of disease altered some understanding of illness, especially for physicians, and the most effective methods of treatment that were prescribed. So these changes in understanding of medicine reduced the popular belief in the curative powers of the mineral springs. However, they still capitalized on the concept of just healing through leisure and recreation and vacation time, and it was a popular notion that these new Harrison hotel owners could capitalize on. So the property of Harrison HotSprings was sold in 1925 to a Vancouver syndicate headed by E.J. Ryan and A.D. Anderson, who went on to establish the Harrison HotSprings Hotel Company and realized their vision of creating a refined summer resort in the Fraser Valley. The new hotel was opened on May 15, 1926, and the natural environmental features of Harrison were maintained for tourists, with the resort incorporating the surrounding lake, mountains, and hot springs into promotion for the tourist expectations that the hotel provided. In this way, the Harrison HotSprings Hotel was attempting to reconcile the tourist desire to experience a natural environment while also appealing to an increasingly modernizing tourist industry. With the reconstruction and new ownership, the emphasis of the hotel shifted. While still retaining the reputation as a healing destination, the hotel also sought to establish itself as a modern pleasure resort. With this involved seeking a wider variety of tourists. It also began to engage with the environment in new ways, offering new recreational activities with a golf course, tennis courts, riding stables, fishing and boating, and a new swimming pool being offered. So many different ways to engage in the environment at Harrison Hot Springs, not just the springs themselves. Rather than offering just a healing resort for leisure and luxury, the new hotel now catered to a more active type of holiday. So to conclude, this work contributes to the field of tourism history in British Columbia, specifically looking at an early form of medical tourism in the province, which has received little attention by historians. And this research also acts as a case study for the ways the tourist industry adapted during the 1920s tourist boom and how automobility created new notions for touristic pleasure and an increasingly diverse array of middle-class consumers. The study also highlights the potential for further research on other mineral springs in British Columbia, such as halcyon and radium hot springs. There exist many potential directions for research within this topic, but I believe examining how the idea of therapeutic landscapes were promoted and sold to tourists offers great insight in understanding the development of British Columbia in the early 20th century, especially how the environment was used to attract both tourists and settlers to the area. Thank you.